Hello friends, in today's tutorial I'm going to be walking you through how to paint the Auspice Maria symbol. Auspice Maria is Latin for under the protection of Mary, and it's also affectionately referred to as the Marian monogram. The goal of my channel is to help artists of all ages connect to God through their creativity. I feel like this would be a great project to do by yourself, as a family, with your small group, youth group, you name it. I'm going to try to make my example match this one as close as humanly possible, but you of course can make any changes that you want to yours. If you want to change up the colors, you want to add something or do something a little bit different, you're more than welcome to. I list all of the supplies that I use and recommend in the description box, but you of course can use whatever you have on hand. For this project, you need a canvas, some paint brushes, acrylic paints, something to put your paint on like a palette or a paper plate, a paper towel, water, chalk or a pencil, and something to protect your clothes like an apron or an old shirt. I'm using acrylic paints, which are permanent once dry, but if you're doing this project with young children, you can use a washable paint like gouache so that it's easy to clean up. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm using an 8x10 canvas, but any size canvas, board, or thick paper would work. Feel free to pause or rewind at any time, and if you feel called to, you're more than welcome to light a prayer candle or play some music in the background. Now let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we're going to be working on is our background. So we're going to be mixing a light sky blue color, and I'm going to use my biggest paintbrush to help mix that color. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1 scoop of white and I'm going to put it off to the side to mix, and I'm going to grab a slightly smaller scoop of the dark blue, and I'm going to mix them together. And when I mix them, it's going to create a pretty sky blue color, kind of like this. If I want it a little bit darker, I can add more blue. And if I want it a little bit brighter, which I do, I'm going to add just a little bit more white. You, of course, can adjust the color to be as dark or as bright as you wish on your example. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off by putting this color at the bottom of our canvas. So I am using long left to right sideways brush strokes. So I want this color to be about the width of my paintbrush, kind of like 2 stacked on top of each other, creating a nice little stripe of blue down at the very bottom. And if you want to, you can even paint this color on the side edges of your canvas. So while that paint is still wet, what we're going to do is we're going to take our same paintbrush, and it's okay if it's still dirty, you're going to dip it into some white. So now we have the dirty blue from before and some white paint on our canvas at the same time. And what I'm going to do is I want to start off by putting this color right above the blue that I first started with. So because both colors were on my brush at the same time, it mixes the two together to create a slightly lighter shade of blue. Now, if I leave it like that, it's going to look like a stripe of dark blue and a stripe of light blue. And I want it to be a little bit softer where these colors meet each other. So what I want to do is I want to put my paintbrush, so half of it is on the dark blue side and half of it is on the light blue side. And I'm going to kind of move my brush in small back and forth brush strokes, kind of mussing up the line where those two colors touch each other. And you can see that that smoothed out those colors. So it's a softer transition from this darker shade to this lighter shade. So I started with small back and forth brush strokes, but once I get it all mixed, I can kind of move my brush back and forth to kind of smooth out that color from one edge of my canvas to the next, and I can kind of continue dragging this color up my canvas a little bit at a time. If you're having troubles getting your paint to spread, one thing that you can do is you can take your paintbrush, you can dip it in a little bit of water, and sometimes that little bit of water can help the paint spread a little bit easier on your canvas. So I'm going to keep adding whatever is left over on my brush to my canvas until I start to run out, which is about now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same dirty paintbrush, I'm going to grab a little bit of my white paint, and I'm going to continue adding more and more of the white paint to my canvas to kind of help lighten up the color as I work my way to the top. And any patches where I feel like it's not as smooth, I can take my paintbrush and I can move it back and forth in between the colors that are already on the canvas and any new colors that I add to my painting. Again, anytime you run out of paint, you can just load up more white on your brush. I want my canvas to get brighter and brighter at the top, so I'm going to grab more and more white paint and place it on my canvas and work my way all the way up to the top so it's darker at the bottom, brighter blue up at the top. So I'm just starting at the top of my canvas and I'm just kind of moving my brush side to side, just kind of smoothing out any brush strokes that I want to. I can dip my brush in some water to kind of help the paint move on my paintbrush if I need to. And it's up to you how dark and how bright you want your canvas to be. If you want it even darker than what I'm doing in my example, you are more than welcome to go back and add extra blue paint to any parts of your canvas that you want a little bit darker. And you can always add more white paint to parts of your canvas that you want a little bit brighter. And everyone's is gonna look a little bit different because we're all unique, and as artists we get to make choices. And so it's your choice how dark or how light you want your canvas to be in your painting. And again, if you want to, you are more than welcome to paint those side edges of your canvas so that way the color kind of matches all the way around. Some people like it colored, some people like it plain white, so it is your choice. So once you get your canvas filled in with the different shades of blue that you like, you can put your big brush in your water cup, and we're gonna take a short break to give this some time to dry. Anytime I have a paintbrush that has paint on it, my water cup is a great place to put that. That way the paint doesn't dry inside of the bristles. And we need to give this about 10 minutes or so to dry. Depending on the size of your canvas, you might need somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes for your canvas to dry. If you just can't wait, you can use something like a blow dryer to speed up the drying process for your painting. We want to make sure that our canvas is completely dry before we do our next step, which will be drawing out the letters A and M for our Auspice Maria. You want to use either a pencil or a piece of chalk to sketch that out. If you're feeling especially brave, you can do it all in one brush stroke, but I like using chalk because it's easy to erase, much easier than using a pencil. So I just want to make sure that I'm leaving a little bit of space on the top, bottom, and side edges of my canvas. That way my initials for Auspice Maria have plenty of room. So what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that I'm starting the letter A of my Auspice Maria kind of in the upper third of my canvas in the center, which is about right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by putting a little mark up at the top for where I want the top of my letter A to go. And I'm going to draw a line for the left side of that A that comes down at a very slight angle. And before I reach the side or bottom, I want to start to curve it up almost like the letter J or a candy cane. Kind of like this. And if you want it even curlier, you can take that end that looks like the letter J and you can spiral it in, kind of like a cinnamon roll, just a little bit more like that. I want to do the same thing on this opposite side. I want to do a diagonal line that comes down at a similar angle, but this time off towards the bottom right edge of my canvas. And it's going to curve up, kind of lined up with the other side. And you can either have it curl up kind of like a backwards J or a candy cane, or you can have it curl in a little bit like the beginning of the spiral of a cinnamon roll. One thing I like to do to make sure that my edges line up is I'll use an extra paintbrush, kind of like a ruler, to make sure that the bottoms of my A line up. And a nice thing about using chalk is, let's say you made a mistake, you could just take a paper towel, dip it in a little bit of water, and any marks that you don't want or that you want to adjust, you can erase it with that watered down paper towel. So since that chalk worked so well, I'm going to use it again to start my letter M for Maria. So we're going to do that piece by piece. So in the middle of your A shape, I want you to put a little mark, and that's going to be where the point of the M kind of like meets in the middle. And we're going to work on the sides first. So what we're going to do is, to create the top parts of the M, you're going to draw a diagonal line that comes across the A up like this. But I want to make mine a cursive M. So I'm going to create a loop, kind of like a bunny ear, up in line with the top of my letter A, like this. So there's my first line, and it comes around in a loop, kind of like a rabbit ear. And I'm going to continue that line down, kind of matching where my A is, like this. And I'm going to have it come across and loop around. So think kind of like when we did the side of the A, it's going to be that similar kind of J or cinnamon roll curve, like this. So I'm just tracing that again so you can kind of see it a little bit more clearly. So it's very similar to the side edges of the letter A. We just have this rabbit ear kind of loop for that top part of the M. We're going to do something similar on this side. So I'm going to do a diagonal line that comes from this middle and out towards the upper right corner of my canvas. And this time I'm going to have my loop come over towards the left and around. So it has a similar rabbit ear kind of loop, like that. And the side is going to be really similar to this letter A, where it kind of comes down at a similar angle and then curves around like a cinnamon roll. So while we're still in this chalk phase, if you like it the way it is, you can leave it. If you want to make any adjustments, you can. I think I want to create just a little bit of separation between these little curly cues that I have for the A and the M. So I'm just using a little bit of water on my paper towel to kind of erase a little bit of that curl that was getting covered up. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to paint on top of our letter A using a smaller paintbrush. So the smaller brush that I'm using, it is a rounded brush. So the brush bristles kind of come up into a nice point. One thing to keep in mind is even when you use a smaller paintbrush, the harder you press, the thicker and more bold your lines are going to be. The less you press, the thinner and more delicate your lines are going to be. Both are good. It's just a personal preference thing for what you want on your painting. So we're going to be mixing a light blue, kind of similar to what we used in our sky, but just a little bit darker so it stands up against our canvas. So what I'm going to do is, because I have some of this light blue that's still just a little bit wet, I'm just going to mix my paint there. So I'm going to grab one more scoop of my dark blue and put it there in a pile. And I'm going to grab a slightly smaller scoop of the white, and I'm going to mix them together. If I want it brighter, I can add more white to the mix, and if I want it a little bit darker, I can add more of the dark blue. And if you notice that your paint is starting to feel a little bit thick on your palette, kind of like mine is, you can take your paintbrush, dip it in a little bit of water, and sometimes that small amount of water can kind of help give it a more inky consistency. So I'm just doing about 2 dollops of water just to kind of thin that out. It's going to make it much easier to draw with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint directly on top of the chalk lines of my letter A. So we just want to make sure that the blue paint that we're using for our letter A is darker than what we have on our canvas. So depending on how dark or light your canvas got, you might want to darken or lighten up the color of your paint. That way it appears better. Don't feel like you have to get all of the chalk covered up. As long as you get most of it covered, any remaining chalk that we have left at the end of our painting session, we can wipe away once our paint is all dry. If we try to erase it while the paint is still wet, it might cause the paint to smear on our canvas, and we don't want that. And because my canvas, that background of my canvas is dry, I can even rest my hand against my canvas to give my hand a little bit more stability. So if that's something that you feel like you need to do to give you a more stable hand when you're tracing this chalk, feel free to rest your hand against that canvas. And as long as it's still dry, it shouldn't smear. So once we get that letter A all traced out, we're going to be doing dark blue for our letter M. So if you have a lot of paint on your paintbrush like me, you can rinse it out, just kind of scrape it against the bottom of your cup to help get the paint out of the bristles, and you can dry it on your paper towel. We're going to use the dark blue straight off of the palette for our letter M. And if you need to, you can dip your paintbrush in a little bit of water and add that to your dark blue paint. That way it's easier to draw with, gives it more of an inky consistency. So what we're gonna do is we're going to trace on top of the chalk lines of our letter M. So while I was tracing my letter M, I was thinking about how I have these really fun kind of rabbit ear loops here up at the top. And this space down here at the bottom, it's feeling a little bit bare. So I think what I'm gonna do for my painting is I'm gonna add one more little loop down here, kind of continuing that middle section and looping back up to this right side. If you don't want to do that on yours, you don't have to. You can even see how mine turns out, and then you can decide. If you want, you're more than welcome to draw it off with chalk first, which I think I might do. I'm just going to add a loop kind of here in this middle section, kind of like this. Yeah, I feel like that's going to fill out the space of my painting a little bit easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue this line of that middle of my M and have it loop up and connect to that other middle segment. So you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Mine was just feeling a little bit empty. Great, I'm much happier with how that looks. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna add a little bit of a highlight. That way the colors don't look flat, but we're only gonna add the highlight on this letter M. If you want to add a highlight on your letter A, that's totally fine. This is your painting. You can customize it however you wish. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to lightly rinse off my brush. Doesn't have to be immaculate, just needs to be mostly clean. And I'm going to grab a little bit of the white paint. I'm going to dip my brush in some water, add a little bit of water to my white paint just to thin it out a little bit. And what I'm going to do is directly on top of this dark blue, I'm going to trace over parts of that letter M, kind of like this, just to brighten up the color a little bit here and there in some spots. So the more white that you add, the brighter that color is going to look. The less you use, the darker it will be. And I can kind of use this white to kind of decide what parts of these curves are in front of others. So I want it to look like this part of the M is in front of this. So I only added the white here, so it looks like it's on top. And I think I'll do a little bit of white here on this curve to make it look like this cursive part is coming in front of this loop. And if you don't like the way it looks, the nice thing about acrylics is you can always paint on top of anything that you want to change. So if I didn't like the way that the white was looking, or I feel like I went too heavy-handed, I could always paint dark blue on top of it to cover it up. So the next thing that we're going to be working on is we're going to be putting in a simple crown right here in the space. You can do your crown any color and any size or shape that you wish. I'll be walking you through how to do a simple version. I'm cleaning off my small brush. I'm rinsing it by scraping it against the bottom of my cup to get all of the blue and white out of my paintbrush, and then I'm drying it on my paper towel. This time I do want it to be clean. That way the blue doesn't mix in with the gold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of this gold paint that I have. I'm using a metallic gold. And right above the curve of the A, I'm going to start off with a slightly curved line. Think kind of like a frown or like a rainbow line. So just ever so slightly curved, and it's kind of matching that top curve of my letter A. So this is going to create the width of that crown. So the wider you make that curve, the wider your crown is going to be. So the next thing that we're going to do is, using the same brush and the same color, we're going to draw two slightly diagonal lines here, and they're just slightly angled to create the side edges of the crown. So I want to put one line that comes up at an angle towards the left like this, and I'm going to do one line that comes off towards the right like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some up and down loops to create a wavy line for the top of my crown. I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put a little dot here in the middle. That way I have one piece that's kind of smack in the middle, and I'm going to put two loops on that right side to create the little bumps tops of the crown, and I'm going to do two bumps kind of like the letter U, and they're like right next to each other touching, and that creates some nice little points on my crown. You of course can do as many or as few as you want on yours, or you can change it up. And then I'm going to fill that crown in solid gold. think I'm going to thicken up this edge of the crown just a little bit down at the bottom. That way it looks like the base is just ever so slightly wider than this inside edge. And I want to decorate my crown so it's just a little bit fancier. I want to keep it simple, but what I'm going to do is I want to add some little dots on the top of the crown. And you could do that by drawing little circles with the brush bristles of your brush. But what I'm going to recommend, so you get a perfect circle with minimal effort, is to use the back stick handle part of your brush. We're going to use that like a stamp. So you're going to dip the back handle, that stick part, into your gold paint, and then you're going to press it against the top of the crown. And that creates pretty much a perfect circle with minimal effort. So you just take the back handle of your brush, you push it against the top part of the crown, and that stamps on a circle. And if you want that circle even bigger, you just wiggle the handle of your brush around and around until the circle is as large as you want it to. And whenever you run out, you just load up your stick handle with a little bit more gold paint and press that on the edges. I also want to add some gold into the corners of my canvas. So what I'm going to do is, using the same dotting stamp kind of brush stroke, I'm going to put 3 little dots in each corner, kind of like this, just for a little bit of extra decoration. Feel free to add as much or as little as you wish. And if there's any decorations or details that I didn't show you that you want to add to your painting, go ahead and do so. The only thing left to do after you finish putting in your gold dots is to sign or initial your painting. Oftentimes people put their signatures in a corner, on the edge of the canvas, or even on the back of the canvas, and then you can pat yourself on the back because you did a great job. You started with a completely blank canvas and you painted every detail all by yourself. So if you do have any remaining chalk lines on your canvas, as long as your artwork is dry, you can take a wet paper towel and you can wipe away any remaining chalk lines. You just want to make sure that you only do this if your paint is completely dry. It only takes a couple minutes to dry, but if you need to, you're more than welcome to use a hairdryer to help speed up that process. If you're new to my channel, hi, my name is Amy Heyse. Thank you so much for painting along with me, and I would love to see how your paintings turned out. If you want to support what I do here, you're more than welcome to make a donation or donate to my art supply wish list on my Buy Me a Coffee page. I want to remind you that you are loved, God loves you very much, and He loves your artwork very much. Thank you so much for painting along with me, and I'll see you in the next video.